The normalizing ESFJ says, I'm not sure if I'm okay with you swearing, but thank you for doing it in behalf of me.
Fair enough.
That's right.
Fair enough.
Yes. Perhaps you're using salty language, sir, but I do appreciate the sentiment.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
ESFJ careers. That's what we're going to talk about this week on the show. If you're an ESFJ listening, you probably know that personality type might unlock some career understanding for you. There might be some information here and some guidance on a career path based on how your personality is wired as an ESFJ. So we want to talk about careers. The reason we're having this discussion, and we've started this 16-part podcast based on every single type and careers, is we're in the middle of running our Personality Life Path program. It's a mentorship. We work with students over 8 weeks. It ends in a live event in real time over Zoom digitally. Every week, we look at one of the Jungian cognitive functions. There's 8 of them, 4 learning functions, 4 decision-making functions. Each week, we take one. We assign students exercises to go test out the archetypical energy. It sounds really woo, but it's really cool. That's represented by this function in their lives. They report the learning back, and then their relationship, this function, be worked on. And we're looking to find the life path for people moving forward. So once you understand how you're wired in your personality, ESFJ, let's say, well, what's next? Where are you headed? What are you going to do with that information? How do you become the best version of yourself? Which relationships, which life, which career path should you be on? A lot of people in this program are in the middle of transitions, and many people, relationship, lifestyle, but many people are reporting career transition moments where they're saying, I've been on one career, I want to change the trajectory. Or I'm just out of university, I want to start on the first career of my life, and I want to make sure I make wise choices that are going to be custom tailored for how I'm wired in my personality. So today we want to talk about careers and we want to look at them in a particular way, a framework that we're calling, well, it's called subtypes. Antonia, let's introduce that concept and we can go deeper.
So, I don't know how many podcast episodes ago it was, but we interviewed our good friend and colleague, Dr. Dario Nardi, who introduced this concept of subtypes that he had been working on based on the results of the EEG scans he's done with people who know their personality type, get scanned, and then observe how their mind is wired, not just based on their type, but other considerations as well. And he noticed that there were 4 distinct patterns showing up over and over again across all 16 personality types. And so he realized that there are not just the 16 types, but there's also, he's calling them subtypes. I think he's calling them that reluctantly. Because unlike type, which appears to have, there's a pre-wiring there. It seems like nature helps provide our personality type. And we may be pre-wired with some of these preferences. Our subtype isn't. That's more of a nurture component. It depends on the experiences we've had growing up and the context we found ourselves in. And after the age of 25, the number one most influential aspect to our subtype is our career choice. And that makes sense, right? That's where we spend 40 plus hours a week. That's our environment that we're swimming in all the time practically. And it's the problems that we are meant to solve, right? What have we been applying our brain? What kinds of problems have we been applying our brain to solve? And depending upon those influences or how they have impacted us, it helps us come up with a subtype.
Yeah.
If you want more information, you can listen to that podcast. It's really interesting, and we dive deeper into how that works and some of the aspects of it that really influence that. But on this episode, we'd like to talk about the results. We'd like to talk about how those subtypes are impacted by careers and vice versa.
Yeah. We'll get into some of the more details of that in a moment. We're going to make it both accessible to you if you're new to type as an ESFJ listening, or if you've been around the type world and you understand cognitive functions, some of the deeper things, we'll talk about some of that too, give an access point to go deeper as well. So we'll be doing double duty. I did some research though, Antonia, before we get started, my internet-based research. Are you ready? This is the top 10 list, according to the internet, for ESFJ careers. So if you go do a general search on Google or kind of just do a searching, you're going to find a lot of these careers recommended for your personality type as an ESFJ. Now, maybe you don't resonate with some of these. We'll talk about why that might be the case in a moment here. But here's the top 10 list, according to the internet, for ESFJ careers. Number 1, social worker. 2, human resources specialist. 3, elementary or middle school teacher. 4, nurse. 5, event planner. 6, occupational therapist. 7, sales representative. 8, customer service rep. 9, dental hygienist. That's very specific. And 10, real estate broker or agent. Mm-hmm. Those sound in alignment with a lot of ESFJs I've known. Some of them sound a little stereotypical, like, oh, you're an ESFJ, so you're going to do these 10 careers. And some are interesting. Some I think are, ones that I think an ESFJ might find themselves in. But there's a bunch of others that aren't on that list, right?
Yeah, and certain subtypes would be more attracted to some of those, and other subtypes wouldn't like them at all. So I think it's not just a matter of I think it's a solid list, but what kind of ESFJ would be attracted to which of those on the list is the question.
So there's 4 expressions of the ESFJ personality. These are flavors. These are almost like the way you show up as an ESFJ. So we're coming from the framework that you as an ESFJ have a mental wiring of making decisions using harmony, extroverted feeling. This is how you go through the world. You want to get the needs met around you, find the social glue that binds people together, make sure the social scene is harmonious. You want to make sure there's harmony in the environment and often getting people's needs met, doing the call it emotional labor in between the things that are happening. A lot of ESFJs find themselves here serving, guiding, making decisions in this space. Pairing that decision-making function as an ESFJ, that's your driver or dominant cognitive function, the way you go through the world. You learn information or input, perceive your world with an introverted process, technically called introverted sensing. We've nicknamed it memory. This is about how the past has shaped you. Knowing that everybody has come from somewhere and the experiences we've had over time have shaped us as humans. And so an ESFJ going through the world, understanding how to get needs met, seeing the harmony they want to create with relationships, and then understanding past precedent, where we've come from, what has shaped us as humans. This gives them a superpower to be able to move through the world, helping people, serving, showing up in leadership, getting things moving forward in a lot of ways. ESFJs are incredible at many different talents. I think they have a lot of flexibility in their career path. There's 4 subtypes now, expressions of that ESFJ personality, though. We call it the dominant, creative, normalizing, and harmonizing ESFJ subtypes. Let's talk about each one of these, both in the broad brush, kind of what it looks like, what careers they might choose if you're identifying with one of these. And we'll just make a quick mention also in some technical things. We talk about those cognitive functions for the type geeks listening as well. So the other thing is this also is associated with Dr. Helen Fisher's work with neurotransmitters and some of the hormones. So we'll be kind of using those interchangeably a little bit, but basically we'll talk about neurotransmitters and how they're associated. There's chemicals in your brain that each of these subtypes are also associated with. Mm-hmm. We'll dip into that just a little bit.
Right.
So let's talk about that first ESFJ subtype.
I do want to make sure that we give a nod to those 4 terms, dominant, creative, normalizing, and harmonizing.
Yes.
Those are terms that are used with permission, borrowed from the work of Dr. Viktor Galenko, who has done work with socionics, which is sort of like the Russian version of Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
And so if you recognize those terms, it's because they are terms that were used before. Yeah. And Dario got permission from Viktor to reuse them because or use them in this context because they're so descriptive. They're so perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's dive into the first of these, the dominant ESFJ subtype. What does the dominant ESFJ look like? So
the dominant ESFJ is driven, confident. They're striving to be a benefit to society by putting themselves out in front and doing that in an attractive and appealing way. They are outgoing, they can listen well, they decide quickly, and they can also speak with confidence, even as they take in that new information. So they have a very assertive manner, an affectation that produces confidence in other people, not just in themselves. They have strong managerial skills. They're good at balancing their values and preferences with while simultaneously responding to the environment. So what does the moment need from me? And how do I make sure that I balance that with the things that are important to me and that I like personally? And they're good at doing that. They're good at responding to the environment without having to leave their values behind or their preferences. They're good at building rapport. They are detail-oriented. They are good at planning, and they attend closely to what people say. So it's a matter of receiving information from others, usually scanning for the needs of the situation, and then creating plans to make sure that that happens, and then organizing people together, sort of herding cats to mobilize everybody in that direction to get those needs met. But they're still linear thinkers at the same time. So they consider one or two pieces of information at a time. They're not bad with dealing with, metaphors, jokes, abstract concepts. They have that relationship to their intuition that allows them to access those pieces, even though they're still, as mentioned, more linear in their thought progression.
But playful.
Exactly. There's a playfulness there, and there's an ability to sort of get concepts that don't have to necessarily be so concrete and rigid. They also have a very strong halo pattern. So if you've heard us talk about the halo pattern in other podcasts, this is it's almost like a ring around the outside of the brain that signals a person is aware of and practiced with the expectations of society.
Yeah.
So they know how to play well with others, basically. They know how to merge into society. And in fact, they have a very strong halo indicating that they can match society's expectations and then not just match them, but also help lead them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're very in touch with health and well-being. They often have technical training. So this is what sets them apart from perhaps other ESFJs, is that they usually are tapped into sort of a technical aspect. They quickly put skills to use for the betterment of those around them and for society as a whole. So again, that responsiveness, but bringing in a technical aspect as well. And they sometimes have a little bit of an entrepreneurial bent, right? They might be interested in starting a new business on their own, or maybe a couple new businesses. They've got that piece where they're tapped into something new and novel and willing to take a risk. And they're often, no matter what their role, they're often advocates, right? Community advocates for whatever it is that they believe on a personal level is important. They also have a reflective side, and they usually bring together facts, feedback, memories, information, and bring them all together in those quiet moments to contemplate bigger meanings. Mm-hmm. One of their challenges, though, is that because they have that more in-charge style, sometimes they can come across as somebody who's a little pushy, right? And that's one of the challenges that they experience, is that assertiveness and that capacity to herd cats and mobilize and move things and be very quickly responsive can sometimes feel to other people a little overwhelming. But otherwise, these, especially if they're mature and seasoned versions, these are really good leaders and managers as ESFJs.
One of the interesting things about the dominant subtype, in fact, many dominant subtypes, no matter which of the 16 types they are, but the dominant ESFJ is they're comfortable with hierarchy. Now, doesn't mean they love it or they want, hierarchy around them all the time, but this is the ESFJ that is most likely to be okay with the pecking order, the chain of command, if you will. Okay enough to be in charge, even drive themselves to want to be in the lead, maybe a manager or a leader role or the top of the company or something like this, or at least moving through those ranks, totally okay with it. So I think that's something important to notice about the dominant. And I think this assertive EJ energy, this is, I think these are some of the stereotypes around ESFJs.
Yeah, I don't know if this ESFJ will necessarily mistype, although they might mistype as a thinker. They might mistype as maybe an ESTJ. Yeah. But I think you're right. They're the list of careers that will help somebody develop these qualities, the dominant subtype qualities, or maybe just appeal to somebody who is already a dominant ESFJ, indicates that, right? Yeah. That they have comfort with management positions, administrative positions, etc. And I think hierarchy it's not a dirty word, right? And I think dominant subtypes understand the purpose of it and the reason why we have a chain of command, right? We need somebody at the top who can herd those cats and get them all moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, the desire for power to be able to meet others' needs. Mm-hmm. I think that's the key here. It's not power for the self, it's power to be able to affect change.
Exactly.
Let's talk about some of the careers this subtype might be clustered around.
Okay. So this is not an exhaustive list. Just get the pattern of what all of these careers have in common. And the point is that they are careers that both appeal to dominant ESFJs and are also careers that will help an ESFJ become more dominant. Yeah. Like these are the environments in which Their mind will be more wired to have that more assertive, confident feel. So the list is nonprofit organization director, community outreach coordinator, social worker, human resources director, healthcare administrator, marketing manager, public relations specialist, career counselor, teacher or educational administrator, corporate trainer, health coach, event planner, politician or political consultant, family therapist or counselor, and life coach.
Let's talk a little bit also about the deeper elements of the cognitive functions. So we mentioned that for an ESFJ, we won't go too much into it, but we did want to mention this for Type Geeks. The two cognitive functions is the technical name that an ESFJ is using. The one is a decision-making function in their brain, and the other is the learning or perceiving function. For an ESFJ, they lead with a dominant or driver function called extroverted feeling. We've nicknamed it harmony. Again, it's about getting needs met. It's about social equilibrium, about creating harmony in the world, quite frankly. And this is what drives the values and the decisions. And then that's paired with that co-pilot auxiliary of introverted sensing, or what we've nicknamed memory, where we've come from the past, tracking changes, all of these things, standardizations. It's how they perceive and learn and take in information. So there's an attunement with these two functions. And the way that they're focused or attuned, not their capacity or their proficiency, but the way that you use these functions indicates your subtype. That's basically how we know what will probably show up on the EEG machines. Let's talk about the attunement. Let's talk about the framework of the attunement, and then let's talk about what it looks like for a dominant. We'll touch on this for each of the subtypes.
Okay, so as mentioned, if you listen to the podcast where we talk to Dario Nardi, we go deeper into this. But effectively, the concept is that each of these functions, these mental processes that make up type, have an orientation that is either focused, assertive, a very almost like a narrow but strong energetic stream going out, right? Yeah. A more assertive bent or orientation. And then we can also use each function in a more diffused way. It's not as focused and targeted, but it takes in a bigger territory. Yeah. You see the peripheral a little bit more. And so you see a wider spectrum. So it's not as intense, it's not as assertive, but it's a little broader and sees a little bit more. For people who have a dominant subtype orientation, so in this case, dominant ESFJs, both of their preferred functions, both extroverted feeling or harmony and introverted sensing or memory, are going to be what's called analytic. That's the more targeted, focused, assertive energy orientation. And when both of your functions are analytic or more assertive, it makes sense that the subtype itself would make a person a lot more assertive, more targeted, more focused.
Yeah. Meaning you're also, though, not as receptive to things coming in from the side. Right. You're on your path with intentionality, dominant, and you may or may not hear the things that are off to the side around you as much as some of the other subtypes we'll talk about.
Yeah, and we talked about with dominant ESFJs that they do listen and they take in information, but they're almost immediately looking for ways to apply the information they heard to respond to the needs of the environment. Well, that means that they're going to collate that information. They're going to consider that information based on experiences that they've already had. And so sometimes taking in information isn't the same necessarily as responding to a bigger picture. It could be a single piece of information and the ESFJ is acting on it quickly. And so in that way, they might not be seeing as big of a picture, taking as much information in order to, to maybe get every need met. Yeah. But that would also take away some of that assertiveness. So it's a cost-benefit analysis, right? In some ways, it's actually good that they're not seeing the whole picture because that takes a little too much time for somebody who's in a position of leadership or management. And as we mentioned, they can a lot of times consider some of those bigger implications when they're alone and quiet.
So each of these subtypes is also associated with a preferred chemical, neurotransmitter or hormone. The neurotransmitter for the dominant subtype, the chemical of choice is testosterone, which would also make sense. More of that assertive energy, testosterone lends to that. I know technically it's not a neurotransmitter, it's a hormone, but we're using these interchangeably.
Why don't we just use the word neurotransmitter and call it good, even though they're technically two different things?
Gotcha.
Like neurotransmitter communicates the idea, I think, well enough. It's a piece of information that goes from one part of the brain to the rest of the body.
Absolutely. So testosterone is the chemical of choice, though.
Right.
And we'll talk about each of the chemicals for each of these. So I feel good about the dominant subtype covering that. Let's talk about the next one in line. So we've got dominant. Next is creative. So what is the creative expressed ESFJ look like?
This is a more exploratory and sociable style of ESFJ. And these ESFJs might actually think that they're perceivers. I could see them mistyping and believing that they're ESFPs after I read this description, or possibly even ENFPs. They're charming, attentive to others, adaptable, often diverse in their interests and skills. And their goal is, instead of leading others, it's to involve others and inspire them. And in Linda Barron's vernacular, they have a get things going style. The dominant ESFJ is more of in charge. This creative is a more get things going, being a catalyst. They have a strong what's called starburst pattern in their EEG scans. And if you've heard us talk about the starburst pattern before, it's basically almost like it's a simulation of a brainstorm. It's taking in a piece of information and connecting it with a whole bunch of other pieces of information. And it almost always shows up the strongest when a person is in a brainstorming session. And dominant ESFJs, it's not noteworthy that they have this, but creative ESFJs, it is. They have a very strong starburst pattern. And that means that they can take in a whole bunch of stuff, or they take in one thing and then see a bunch of different connections around it. And they're not necessarily as put off by new ideas. They are more responsive and adaptive to new concepts. They are also very observant, and they immediately put side by side this new idea they just heard with everything that they've ever seen before. And then they try to kind of understand what it could mean. They're a lot more open to the idea of brainstorms and what I think a person could call sort of unstructured creativity. They're also distractible. And that's the cost benefit analysis, right? They're more open, they are more creative, and they're also way more distractible.
Squirrel.
Exactly.
Like new shiny objects come in and then their attention's drawn over there.
You got it. So they fill their days with pleasant, interesting diversions, right? And usually that's a good conversation with an interesting person, but it means that they're not going to be as on top of things as maybe a dominant ESFJ would. They're not as targeted, focused. They're a little bit more open and a little bit more all over the place, which is one of the reasons why they might mistype themselves as ESFPs or ENFPs, since that's the stereotype for those types. Yeah. But they're still pretty good at setting goals, and they're pretty good at following through on plans. And so they may have this distractible quality, but they're judgers all the same. And so if they do have a plan, they can stick to their plan. And they are people who have varied interests. So in their job, in their career path, you might see a whole bunch of different things they've done, or they might be doing a whole bunch of different things in a single job or career. They also really like travel. They like exploring cultural and historical sites. They really enjoy people coming along with them on the ride and sharing all these experiences together. They like being in the limelight, so they enjoy performing on stage. And they tend to be just sort of this flurry of energetic activity. They're very interesting to other people as a general rule. But they can also be a little careless, right? That's the distractibility thing. They might not be as on top of things, and they might be a little careless in some of their behaviors. And the biggest downside is that they can create a flurry of surprise drama around them. Not even sure how they got into this drama.
I imagine this subtype is the ESFJ that has a lot of relationship cul-de-sacs, I'll call it. Like relationships that were kind of building towards something, but then something else came along. And so it's not a severing of a relationship. I wouldn't even say the word abandonment is appropriate, but just a diffusion of the energy. And so sometimes there's a lot of, I would assume that the creative ESFJ has unfinished relationship business behind them, like with other people throughout their life, just because people are so important to ESFJ. It's not about projects as much as new people coming into life. So a lot of relationships to manage and to handle can get overwhelming, even for someone that's wired for that much relationship management.
Well, they're also wired or have trained themselves to get in relationships in kind of an open-ended supportive way.
Yeah.
And so that open-endedness, like you said, might create a lot of those cul-de-sacs. They might have a lot of plate spinning, actually.
Yeah.
And their goal is to be supportive, but sometimes I could see that also getting a little overwhelming and having a hard time keeping up with everybody.
Yeah, and seeing all the possibility and potential of every possible relationship that I can start up. look at what could happen. Look at the potentiality there. You're creative and you're not thinking about all the work that's required, all this. It's just all the possibilities. And so you keep creating this dynamic. A lot of creative subtypes from a career standpoint, I think, benefit from this idea of platform thinking. So a great example of a platform is like if you might be watching this podcast on YouTube. YouTube is a platform. It enables us as literal creators, podcast creators, to create something and then distribute it on a platform and have an audience for it. Creative subtypes, no matter if it's ESFJ or another type, often benefit from these types of tools, these types of platforms. It may not be YouTube as a platform, it might be Uber as a platform to be a driver or something else, Etsy, where to sell your crafts or your creations. So creative subtypes, this is how you identify as an ESFJ, start to think in terms of what platforms can I associate with to both support me. I'm used to supporting other people all the time, but I need to be supported. And also a platform can help create a container. You're on YouTube. Well, now that the container means you're probably going to be creating video, not audio, because you're on YouTube. It creates that container. So it helps you focus and it also supports you. And I think this can be very beneficial for creative ESFJs to connect themselves to that platform and then use that as their catalyst for doing great, expressive work in the world.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And especially since this is a type, creative subtypes tend to be the ones that have the biggest struggle with self-discipline.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's because they have that more fun, casual, sort of get things going style. And even if, like in this case, they are judgers, so they can create a plan and stick to the plan, there's still a desire to keep things open and fun and interesting. They're chasing dopamine, right? Like you mentioned, the neurotransmitter of dopamine. Oh, we haven't mentioned that yet. I guess
No, we jumped the gun.
I jumped the gun.
The neurotransmitter is dopamine. That's the
right.
choice for all creative subtypes, creative ESFJs. And that makes sense, right? That a creative subtype would chase dopamine neurotransmitter.
Exactly.
And they tend to seek other people that seek the same.
Exactly. And so because of that, things like platforms and support structures from others and maybe people who are a little bit will help them find the more grounded half of themselves might be really good for people of this style. Now, speaking of groundedness, there is one note about, and this might be why this subtype has a tendency to mistype, possibly as ESFPs, is that they have very strong body-based awareness. And Dara mentions that means they learn and repeat procedures, routines, and steps, meaning that they can figure out any skill that just requires some repetition, or they can just dance the night away with energy and style.
Yeah.
And so, again, this might be a type that mistypes as ESFP, but actually is just simply the creative ESFJ.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the careers that these dopamine-chasing creative ESFJs might find themselves in.
Okay, so again, this is not an exhaustive list. These are the kinds of careers that might attract a creative ESFJ, or if you want to become more creative as an ESFJ, these are the kinds of careers that might bring this part of you out. Event coordinator, television or radio presenter, retail manager, publicist, talent agent, travel agent or tour guide, wedding planner, art or music therapist, personal stylist or fashion consultant, social media manager, customer relations specialist, interior designer, museum or gallery curator, recreation coordinator, and food and beverage manager.
Man, so many of those are facilitating people having amazing experiences, creating a creative environment or circumstance to not just get needs met, but get experiences had, like to have a moment with something. And I think that's a really cool list and if you identify with one of those and are more the creative style, maybe you're in a career like that. Or if you want to, again, like Antonia said, lean more into your creative subtype, you might want to pick something that's in alignment with one of those careers that can help shape you and wire you that way. So let's talk a little bit about one layer deeper. We talked about the dominant driver function of extroverted feeling harmony, the co-pilot or auxiliary function of introverted sensing or memory. The dominant, both of these cognitive functions, both the decision-making and the learning style, are analytically focused.
If you're a dominant subtype, right?
Intentionality. Now the creative, it's different. Not both are not analytic.
No. So in the case of the creative subtype, the perceiving function of introverted sensing or memory, that stays analytic. But the judging function, decision-making, as you mentioned it before, extroverted feeling or harmony, that becomes holistic. That's more open-framed. And that makes sense that there would be less certainty around the judgment of how things should happen, right? There'd be a little bit more openness in that for a creative subtype.
But there's a lot of analytic energy on the perception, like how I want to perceive the quirkiness, the creativity, the perception. I'm on a hunt for something creative in my life if I'm a creative ESFJ. Let's talk about the next subtypes. We talked about dominant, creative. The next ESFJ is called the normalizing subtype of ESFJ. What does this look like?
So this is the opposite of the creative. And we might, I don't know, I think we might recognize these qualities and characteristics in the ESFJ stereotypes a little bit more. Although these types might also mistype as perhaps introverts or even thinkers. Ooh. So the normalizing subtype is a more conventional and specialized style. They're careful, they're concerned, friendly, professional. They fit well with society and in very familiar roles. And in Linda Barron's vernacular, they have a more chart the course style. They are linear thinkers, so they have very step-by-step thinking. They're grounded in their senses with a lot of body awareness. They're more auditory than they are visual. Creative types tend to be more visual. Normalizing types tend to be more auditory, and that holds true for the normalizing ESFJ. They're mindful listeners and speakers. So this is a more patient, a more kind of chill vibe ESFJ in a patient, thoughtful, considerate way. They also have a very solid halo like the dominant ESFJ does, meaning that they fit well, they understand societal expectations and they fit well in those expectations. And they generally have a giant database of knowledge and memories in anything that they're specialized in. So they might choose the job, the job or career path they're on, or maybe it's just something that's a side hobby. But they're the kind of people who suddenly discover that they know more than everybody else about this one particular thing. And that's because they just create a huge storehouse of information around their specialty. And when anything new comes along, unlike the creative ESFJ that is way more open to novelty and possibilities and new things, the normalizing, that's when they throttle and they put on the brakes. That's something that needs some time from them to really get used to this novelty thing, this new thing that came out of left, feels like it came out of left field. And when they do that, just like they create that database of experiences and memories and information about anything that's a specialty, they'll pull on that same strength to understand this new concept. And they'll put it very carefully against everything that they've ever seen around this subject. Once they get that new idea, it's a massive aha for them. So if they do accept a new concept, it's kind of it's a big deal like they got it, but like for them, it's a big deal. It usually changes things for them a little bit when they really do understand this concept that may have felt so far out of left field. And they go, no, this fits with everything else. I see this pattern.
Yeah, it's almost like the normalizing ESFJ is a river over time, that something might be introduced that's foreign to that river, but it gets absorbed. It's almost like that's the metaphor I see. It gets absorbed into the river and just can be part of the stream of things once it can be adjusted.
Yeah.
And I think that this subtype also lends itself to a longevity. Like you're going to find people in, like I think you mentioned, potentially long career tracks, unlike maybe the dominant who's seeking results in the outer world between people or things they want to do, and the creative, which is looking for the new shiny creativity to latch onto. This normalizing's okay with sticking with something for a period of time,
right? Letting
it develop, letting things mature and develop over time, and just incorporating things on a long timeline, becoming more and more specialized. And kind of the steady wins the race mentality.
Yes, exactly. Although they can get used to new things in a certain, like let's pretend a normalizing ESFJ is really into fashion.
Yeah.
And they understand that new fashions come all the time. And so they're tracking for that. So it's not like they're going to throttle the change of fashion, because that's the nature of fashion.
Yeah.
Is that it alters and changes over time all the time. It's just in those areas in which things are well established. That's when that, like you mentioned, they're looking for something for the long haul. They're looking for things that really stick.
Yeah.
And so when new ideas really get inside their mind, when something is like lights up their brain in novelty, Dario calls it a buzzworthy new idea. It usually is something that's very exciting to them, and they might even act on it almost immediately, interestingly enough.
Well, and I mean, you are an ESFJ listening. Even if you're a normalizing ESFJ, you still have that quirky creative spark in you. It's not like you don't, I mean, the creative subtype's not the only one of the subtypes that has this. So I think for this normalizing, things like hobbies, things outside of work that can bring you joy and spark some of that creativity and those quirky offbeat elements that every ESFJ has that want to come out, there's a container for that. I think you can create a whole life of hobbies and other activities with people that can help you express some of that inside of you.
Yeah, in fact, actually for the normalizing ESFJ, they are usually not that ambitious with their careers. And the reason why is because it takes away too much from community and family.
Yeah.
A lot of normalizing subtypes are very career oriented, but the ESFJ really wants to make sure that they're balancing home life and work life. And so they're not going to be necessarily as ambitious as a dominant ESFJ. They're going to get a stable situation and they're going to pour into their community and family. And so like you're talking about those hobbies, that's part of it. That's all part of having a rich life outside of just a job or a career.
Yeah.
And you're right. And those things are really important to them. In fact, a couple of things that are noteworthy is that they like a beautiful, cozy home. They appreciate animals, craftwork, music, and nature. So a lot of hobbies like that are very cathartic for them, things that'll kind of let out a little bit of steam. They are good administrators as a general rule. When we talk about, of course, we're talking about careers, not just home life. So when you go over to the career side, yes, home life is important. Creating and establishing that stability is important. But when it comes to their job, they're also going to be very conscientious there. Dario says that they can be friendly enforcers of norms and values, meaning that they will bring in a stability into the career just like they have in their regular home life. And sometimes it can get some pushback from other people, right? If they're friendly enforcers of all the protocols, sometimes people feel like they're a little too pushy about protocols, but they're doing it for a really important reason, right? They want to make sure that they're honoring what has already been established.
And ultimately getting needs met. I mean, ultimately trying to make sure everybody can interface well with harmony.
Exactly. They're there to help stabilize environments, and they prefer smaller environments. I mean, sometimes they're in large companies, but large companies can sometimes get too large, right? Usually they want something a little bit more manageable, a little smaller community, something where they can observe themselves having a positive, stabilizing contribution.
Yeah.
Although there was one note that I thought was interesting is that they're personable and bring daily cheer with an occasional side helping of dark humor. So this is where that quirkiness probably comes out.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, they also, just like the creative ESFJ, is like, how did I create this drama? A normalizing ESFJ will sometimes create drama as well, but as opposed to being confused by it, they're doing it to let off a little steam.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. A strategy.
Yeah, it's like a little dramatic outburst or a little rebellion that surprises everybody around them, and that's just to let off some steam.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the jobs they might cluster around. Yeah. And I'm guessing these are going to be more, the creative was more maybe solopreneur or like on your own kind of creative support. This is probably going to be a lot of like connect to a company or an organization type careers.
Well, and I think they're going to be supportive careers too.
Yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to more in the lead like the dominant or more of the creative artistic expression with the creative. This is going to be more support oriented. So the list is, again, not comprehensive, but academic counselor, customer service specialist, dental hygienist. Wasn't that on your list? Registered nurse, executive assistant or secretary, occupational therapist, librarian, pharmacy technician, veterinarian or veterinary technician, social services case manager, home health aide, school counselor, medical office manager, nutritionist or dietitian, and childcare provider or early childhood educator.
Yeah. I think this subtype of the four, and we're going to get to harmonizing in a moment, but I think this is going to hold true even when we get to harmonizing. This subtype here, because they understand this is a subtype that's very tuned into how things happen in like the regular world, like organizations, support roles, the economics of it, like the economics in a broader term. So I think this is the subtype that struggles with things like emotional labor the most because they're an ESFJ at the end of the day, going to a job that they get value compensated for. But there's so much stuff that happens with that harmony driver or dominant function of harmony, extroverted feeling, wanting to get needs met. ESFJ just can't help themselves. It doesn't matter if it's not necessarily quote unquote on the job description or they don't get paid directly. An ESFJ is most likely going to show up and want to offer support and help. And then eventually, if that's done enough without a return, there's a little bit of bitterness or resentment that can form around it. I'm doing all this emotional labor for everybody at the office. Who's going to take care of me, damn it? Like that kind of feeling, right? It's almost like this, nobody's noticing what I'm doing between the cracks, right? Between the job.
Yeah.
And so I think this subtype probably struggles with that the most. And so that's maybe just something, if you find yourself here, just have an eye on your boundaries and the ways that you're overextending, the way you're overgiving maybe as an ESFJ, that you're not getting a return on that. And so you might want to be mindful of it and just have that awareness, especially if there's a subtype.
Yeah. The normalizing ESFJ says, I'm not sure if I'm okay with you swearing, but thank you for doing it in behalf of me.
Fair enough.
That's right.
Fair enough.
Yes. Perhaps you're using salty language, sir, but I do appreciate the sentiment.
You get it, right?
Right.
Neurotransmitter of choice is serotonin. So this normalizing subtype is going to be more associated with serotonin than the other chemicals. And let's talk about the mental wiring of those two functions. Extroverted feeling, harmony, driver, dominant, introverted sensing, memory, co-pilot, auxiliary. How are these attuned?
Okay, so for those of you who are the type geeks that understand what Joel mentioned, because we said we wanted to keep it accessible for those of you who are new, but also put a little bit of technical jargon in there if you're more of a type geek. It is the opposite orientation from the creative subtype. So in this case, extroverted feeling or harmony as a first function would be more analytic. And then introverted sensing or memory as the perceiving auxiliary function would be holistic. So it's the reverse of the creative. Which
makes sense. Having more standards, should statements, values around how the external world, the judging nature, extroverted feeling or harmony should happen, being more holistic or open about the perceiving elements of it all.
Well, and I think the reason why this makes sense to me, and I know I've had conversations with people at times that said, wouldn't that be in reverse? Like, wouldn't the introverted sensing be more analytic for a normalizing subtype? For those of you who are type geeks, just ruminating on it for a moment. I think the reason why it tracks for me is that when your perceiving function is holistic, it means you have a more receptive experience with it. It means that you're going to be more open to messages of how the world should be set up, as opposed to being more assertive and having more of like well, I think it should be set up this way. You have more receptivity to worldview. And so if your perceiving function is the one that's holistic, you're going to get more messages from society because we're constantly being socialized. You're going to receive these messages from society about worldview, and you're going to feel a need to, sort of support that and continue to be open and receptive to messages from society about worldview. And then you're going to take your judging function, your decision-making function, and that's going to be more analytic. Now the information you took in with your perceiving function gets championed by the judging function of setting it up and matching those societal expectations. So it makes sense to me that the normalizing subtype would have a perceiving function that's receptive and a judging function that's more analytic or assertive. But that's just for the type geeks out there. We can move on and get back to an accessible place with the ESFJ type.
All right. So we've talked about the dominant, creative, normalizing ESFJ. Let's talk about the harmonizing ESFJ. What does this subtype look like?
Okay. So the harmonizing subtype is more empathic. It's more reflective. It's when I said normalizing is more chill vibe, this is the super chill vibe ESFJ for the most part. These are very deeply caring feelers. And this is true for all harmonizing subtypes, but particularly for the ones who lead with a feeling function. These are the super empathic version of the type. They also have a tendency to bring some sophistication to things. So it is common for the harmonizing subtype to be an experience or wiring that happens later in life. It's most commonly found in people over the age of 40. That doesn't mean you can't be a harmonizing ESFJ that's younger, But as a general rule, we grow into this later on in life. So there's a tendency for the subtype to have a sophistication that comes along with age, wisdom, seasoning, but not always. That's not always the case. They're more behind the scenes style. So if the dominant, in Linda Barron's vernacular, if the dominant is in charge, the creative is a get things going. The normalizing would be a behind the scenes. The normalizing is more of the chart the course style. And then the harmonizing would be behind the scenes. And they also, they have the sophistication comes from a complex neural wiring that's called a diamond-shaped pattern that connects multiple different parts of the brain together in almost like a zigzag. And for ESFJs, they create these networks of all of these diverse brain regions that work together in harmony that allows them to connect the dots of a whole bunch of different things that might not be directly communicated with. And so they have a relatively intuitive style, particularly when they're dealing one-on-one with other people. They're really good listeners. And so all the ESFJs have a capacity to tap into it. Maybe the dominant subtype, they're still good at listening, but they're tracking and listening for a certain thing.
Yeah.
Like, what is the needs of the room? How do I respond to those quickly? This is not scanning and listening for specific things. This is like a general openness to listening and receiving lots of information. And when they do that, they're not just scanning for needs, they're also looking for factual details. So this is also a connection to a more thinking part of the brain as well. So they're a little connected, a little more in touch with the intuitive and the thinking part of who they are. But that comes at a cost, right? That capacity to be more in touch with the intuition and that thinking style. And the cost is that they have the weakest halo of all the ESFJs. In fact, sometimes it's missing.
Yeah.
And that halo is the expectations of society. So these are the ESFJs that are kind of quirky and weird.
Halo is referencing the EEG brain scans.
Right. Like
I mentioned.
Pattern. That's right. Well, like I mentioned before, it's that connection around, I thought I mentioned it earlier, but I could be wrong. But it's
I'm just saying in case somebody sees this one little piece right here, they'll see the whole episode.
Right. Of course, because these get chopped up into 10-minute bits. So the halo is the ring around the mind or brain that indicates a person is tapped into and understands and responds to social expectations.
Yeah.
And most ESFJs are really good at it. But the harmonizing ESFJ, particularly if they're older, maybe they just got to that place where they don't care that much anymore. And so they're just not attending to it. And so they tend to be a little bit more of, Dario calls them a bit of odd birds and with unusual habits and quirks. And so this ESFJ is not going to be as stereotypical. In fact, they might see themselves as introverts. They might see themselves as intuitives. I wouldn't be surprised if these ESFJs mistype as INFJs a lot.
Yeah, or maybe INFPs or even ISFJs. Introvert and intuitive, I think, would probably be the mistypes.
Exactly. Particularly since harmonizing subtypes are one-to-one styles. And so they really prefer things to be one-to-one or smaller groups as a general rule. And when they take on these roles, because of course we're talking about careers, and so they find themselves in roles where they work one-to-one with people, they're really tuned into reading that person, adapting to them, understanding a deeper component. But oftentimes this is in positions of counseling, right, or helping the person out. And unlike other types that might try to assist that person with new ways of, new perspectives or new ways of thinking about things, these ESFJs are looking for a practical application. They're really tuned into figuring out what the other person needs and then giving them practical steps to implement so that they have real, quicker real world results. It's not just a reframe. It's actually, this is what you do in order to improve your circumstances. And they're comfortable using, Dario says, complex conceptual models, at least in their specialty. So again, tapped into an intuitive aspect, tapped into an understanding of mental models. At least in their industry, they're going to be very open to these ideas of understanding where a person fits in a mental model.
Yeah. So because of that one-to-one component, working with people directly, and because of the more reserved nature of the harmonizing ESFJ, often it's going to be challenging for this subtype to push itself out there. It's not going to necessarily be natural for this style of ESFJ to go and market themselves, let's say, or toot their own horn. So often it can be helpful to have an advocate or a champion, a friend, family member, partner, spouse, somebody that understands your value as a harmonizing ESFJ that can say, no, I vouch for this person. They know their stuff. They can actually be very helpful to you. They're not good at marketing themselves. Yeah, whatever. But I mean, they can show up, they can deliver, they can be an amazing asset, amazing, support to you, help to you, whatever. So I think, we talked about the creative looking for a platform to connect to. Well, I think that the harmonizing needs a person to connect to, or persons to connect to, that can help, again, put them on, promote them, put them forward, recommend them. So their network, I think your network of people is going to be very important for opportunities in your career life for you if you identify as a harmonizing ESFJ.
Yeah, and harmonizing ESFJs, unlike, say, creatives, when we talked about building out all of those, cul-de-sacs of people, the harmonizing ESFJ is going to have a much smaller, tighter group of friends. And those relationships are going to be really important to them. They like a more chill vibe. They like a more comfortable environment. They like something that's more even-keeled with enough novelty, because they are tapped into that intuitive aspect. They need enough novelty to keep things interesting. And they need those people, that small group of people that are important to them, to understand that they are quirky, that they're a bit of an odd duck.
Let's talk about some of the career clusters this subtype might find itself in. You, as an ESFJ, might find yourself in.
Right.
What are some of the careers?
So these will be careers that are interesting and attractive to harmonizing ESFJs, but they're also the kinds of careers that might help an ESFJ tap into harmonizing traits, right? So help them wire themselves more that direction. Again, not comprehensive list, but we've got mental health counselor, business consultant, diplomat or foreign service officer, executive coach, project manager, clinical psychologist, social researcher, humanitarian aid worker, mediator or conflict resolution specialist, speech language pathologist, occupational therapist, hospice or palliative care specialist, cultural diversity consultant, special education teacher, and customer relationship manager.
I'm noticing that many of those example careers are about communication, but not necessarily verbal communication. Some are economic, some are energetic, some are empathic, some are emotional. Like there's a bunch of communication roles there, helping people bridge and come together and connect with each other. And the economy is different, right? It's not just about money or something or connection, like transacting that way. It's transacting through all of these different economies, which is interesting. So I think this is the sage, the wise, not old ESFJ, but the old metaphorically, the wise old person that has a lot of wisdom to dispense. Again, a little slower pace. The rhythm or the pacing is maybe a little bit at a lower cadence, but that allows them to tap into more of that intuition, more into the empathy, more into the deeper elements of the human experience that they are going to help other people with.
And in some ways, it's probably better if that style comes a little later in life, because if you're not tapped into society's expectations with somebody with ESFJ preferences, it's better if you were at one time and you've overcome it, as opposed to just never being tapped into it. And so if you did start out as a harmonizing ESFJ, which some circumstances do very much influence that wiring under the age of 25 that has nothing to do with career or occupation, if that's the case, you might want to venture out into some of the other subtypes and gain some of that social expectation awareness, really tap into that piece, particularly with normalizing ESFJ preferences. But it's still not a bad place to be, right? Who cares if you're an odd duck? I don't care. I have ENTP preferences. Doesn't bother me at all. But this is an ESFJ that might have trouble really identifying themselves in that, that space, because that's not usually how we see people with ESFJ preferences.
Yeah. The neurotransmitter chemical is estrogen, or the hormone estrogen that influences
Let's just call it neurotransmitter from this point on to make life easy.
Okay. Estrogen is what the harmonizing is chasing, that chemical. And let's talk a little about the function. So again, the dominant driver function for an ESFJ is extroverted feeling or harmony. The co-pilot auxiliary function, the perceiving learning function, is introverted sensing or memory. There's the analytical or holistic bend. Which way are these both functions focused?
So it is the opposite of the dominant. So if the dominant, both of those functions are analytic, focused, assertive, then for the harmonizing, they're both holistic. They're both more receptive, diffused, a little bit, more open spaced. And that's one of the reasons why, as you mentioned, they can really use people to champion them and kind of push them forward because they have a tendency to be a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah. So partnerships will be very key for this subtype. Okay. So we've talked about the dominant, creative, normalizing, harmonizing, ESFJ subtypes. Daria was going to use the word variant, but variant has a very different meaning now. So we're calling them subtypes, but just don't think of them as concrete, absolute wiring of who you are. You're an ESFJ listening. You make your best decisions using harmony. You learn your best using memory. That's how you're wired. Now, if that's a song sheet, those are the musical notes in the song sheet. The way that these subtypes show up is the expression of that song. It's the performance of it. So interesting to know, you can decide a career based on your subtype. Your subtype probably influenced what you're doing in your career or your job right now, if you're in a career, or the one you're going toward, if you're in university or something. However, it can flip the other way too. The career you choose can shape your subtype. So your subtype can inform the career you go for, but the career you end up in can influence and shape the expression of your ESFJ personality type. So if let's say you are more creative, but you find yourself in a more counseling, people helping role that is more for the harmonizing, over time, you're going to become more harmonizing. You're going to lean more into that part of you, and you'll be expressing your ESFJ nature in that way. So that's really great news in that if there's an area you want to grow into, well, if you can put yourself in the context around the people and the job that would help you wire that way or to express that way, well, now you have your path in front of you. Now you know what growth you can do just by putting yourself into a certain role.
Yeah, I really like this concept of subtypes because I like and what you just said reinforces the plastic nature of our minds.
Yeah.
Right. There are traits that all four subtypes come with that are desirable, and there's drawbacks to all four subtypes. So having the capacity to, choose a different career and move into a different subpath arena is, I think, very positive. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right? Rewiring ourselves or picking up new skills that forces us out of our comfort zone. That's growth though, right? All growth requires that. But knowing that you already have a talent for all four of these, it's just a matter of developing the skill. I think it's a very optimistic way of looking at it.
Yeah. Okay. So you've been patiently listening along with us. You've been the third person in this conversation. You haven't had a microphone because you've just been listening asynchronously. We do want to hear from you now, though. You can come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave us a comment, ask a question. More importantly, if you could share your story. Stories are compressed experiences that we can learn from. Other people can learn from, they can contribute to. And it helps you probably organize your thoughts about what happened in your life. So where are you in your career journey? Are you starting out? Are you in the middle of it? Are you near the end of it? Are you changing it? Are you in a transition moment? Which of these subtypes do you identify with? Have you flexed and flowed into different energies throughout your life? Are you excited about the idea of maybe leaning into one of these energies more and exploring this part of who you are? We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. I enjoy them. I read every single review.
It's fuel for your soul.
It is.
You read it and it just keeps you going.
You got it. So if you want to do that, I certainly wouldn't balk. We have a video podcast on YouTube. You might be watching us right now. And if you enjoyed this episode, you can like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the little bell that indicates when a new episode is out. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it in all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Goodreads or on Amazon, that also helps us out a lot. And if we have shaken your world up and you're like, am I even an ESFJ? Am I one of these subtypes? I don't even know anymore. Or perhaps you identified with different best fit type preferences, and now you're wondering if you're a subtype of ESFJ. You can head over to personalityhacker.com and take our free online assessment. It doesn't mean it's conclusive, but it might be one of the lily pads on your journey to discovering your best fit type.
Yeah, and while you're there, if you are an ESFJ, you identify that way, consider getting the ESFJ Owner's Manual. It's not just an owner's manual you get off the shelf and you hold and have on yourself. This is a tool designed for you to create an owner's manual for your ESFJ personality and life. The "you are here" dot on the map of your life. Now that you understand who you are, how you're wired, where can you go? A career, relationship, we touch about all those things. So I think an owner's manual would be very helpful for you as an ESFJ. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.